Greetings everyone, it's Jeremy Sutton here from PrecisionPrinciple.com coming to you from Makloganj, India on day 12 of the 30-day intensive Ashtanga yoga training. Today I'd like to go into a little bit about ego, mindfulness, and meditation. What are they? How are they related? Now, we've talked a little bit about this previously, in particular as related to yoga. Meditation is part of the 6th and 7th branches together that come together for a meditative practice. But what are mindfulness and the ego? What do they have to do with these things? Now, in the Western world, ego is sometimes a sensitive word. I mean, we all know that we have an ego, or maybe we don't know that we have an ego and we really don't like being told that we do. But I'm here to say that, unfortunately, maybe unfortunately, we all do have an ego, and this is probably hardest to deal with for people who are generally consider themselves to be very good people all the time. People who are kind, people who are compassionate, tend to think to themselves, well, wait a minute, I'm a nice guy. I'm not an ego. I don't have an ego. I'm not a jerk. But we do all have an ego. This ego is rooted in basically what it means to be born a human. And there's a number of ways to relate to this. In one sense, ego is the sense of self, the sense that I am. Freud, a long time ago, about 100 years now, said there's 3 parts of the psyche. He had the id, which was kind of that instinctual, urge-based part of us. The superego, which is sort of society's rules and regulations that it gets imposed on us. And between these two, influences, society's norms and my personal urges to just do what satisfies me, here is the ego that is kind of sitting in the center, that has to decide between the two sides. And now this is a familiar metaphor. I mean, it sounds a lot like, here I am with the devil on my one shoulder and the angel on my other shoulder, and both are whispering in the ear. What am I going to do? How am I going to get by? So these symbols have a lot of resonance. In the present day, ego is often looked at as a little bit differently. I mean, there are as many ways to define ego as there are people who say the word. But generally, it's considered the sense of self, and oftentimes it's associated with those lower impulses, that self-centeredness, right? Now, how can we identify the ego within us? What can we do to sort of figure out, like, hey, I think all the time, so which part of me is the ego? Isn't it just me? Isn't these just my thoughts? Well, the ego might not be different than you. For one, it is the sense of I am. But we sort of get a sense of the ego whenever we think of words such as self-control or self-discipline. These words kind of indicate that there's at least 2 parts of us, one of which can exert control or discipline over the other part of us, right? So which part of me is that ego? Which part of me is the higher self? How do I even know the difference? Can I know the difference, or is it always just a guessing game? Well, the easiest first place to start is just to consider, am I acting in my own self-interest, or am I acting on behalf of others for something that's outside of me? Most of us, most of the time, are acting for ourselves. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I have to feed myself, I have to get myself dressed every day, so when I act on behalf of myself, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The question is when I start to do things mindlessly, as in, who's really in the driver's seat of my life? Am I sort of led around by the nose, by my ego? Oh, I want that, I need to do this. Oh, I feel an urge, so I'm going to satisfy that urge right away. I'm going to do these things and just kind of be led about by my instinctual, emotional nature? Or do I have thoughts about how my actions pertain to not just this moment, but even more to the future? That part of us that sort of can think about the broader picture and plan accordingly is at least partially our higher self. But again, these mechanisms, the ability to think about the future is easily hijacked by the lower egoic systems, right? So how do I really know the difference? Can I know the difference? Well, one step into becoming better at distinguishing between which part of me is really influencing me at any given time is mindfulness. And as an extension of formal practice, we could go into meditation. Now, mindfulness is sort of like awareness in the present moment. It's about being aware of whatever we're doing right here as we do it. So there are a number of ways to be mindful, and to increase our mindfulness. One way in particular, you can go check out precisionprinciple.com and check out the game, because if you haven't started the game yet, then you're missing out on a tool to bring your life to the next level. This tool is basically a way for us to increase our mindfulness at all times, as often as possible. So that's one tool that we can use to bring our attention back to the present moment. But one thing we can do is breathing. Anytime, any place, we can just take a deep breath. As soon as I realize that it's been a while since I've taken a deep breath, then it's pretty likely that I've basically been led around by my ego for a while. And that's that sort of jumping mind that just goes from place to place. It's that part of us that, when we know that we ought to probably get offline and maybe read a book instead, and just maybe we just go to bed because it's getting too late, but instead we jump around for 2 more hours on different internet sites that we didn't even really care about. At least that's my experience. I'm not sure what you guys have experienced out there. But the point is that anytime that we are doing things mindfully, it's more likely that we're identifying with that higher part of ourselves, that higher consciousness, so to speak. So one way to develop mindfulness in a more broad context is a formal meditation practice. So what can I do if I want to start a formal meditation practice? What's the best ways to start, or what is a way to start? When should I do it? And what am I even trying to do anyway? What's the point of all this, right? So in the yogic tradition, we have the 6th and 7th branches, which pertain to the 6th is about focusing on to one item. Now, if you'll remember, the 5th branch, the one preceding this, is about turning in of the senses. So instead of being focused outward, we start to focus inward. And in particular, the 6th is focus on one single thing. So we might choose something as simple as the breath and just observe the breathing. And it is incredibly interesting, at least in my own experience, to find how difficult it is simply to count the breaths as they come and go. Just 1, 2. Half the time, if you're sitting down in a formal meditation practice, eyes closed, half the time, me personally, I won't even get to 4 or 5 before some sort of outside thoughts start to creep in. You'll have the experience sometimes of keeping the count going. Maybe you even count to 7, 8, 9, but then you realize that while that count was going, you were also thinking about, hey, what am I going to do after this meditation is over? I wonder how much time left is on the counter. I wonder if I should talk to my friend or quit my job or do this, that, or the other thing. I wonder if I'm exercising enough. While this counting is going on, there's this running dialogue in the back of the head that just keeps on going. All right, well, this is why meditation is so useful in sort of identifying which part of me is in control at any given moment. Because that voice that speaks up in the back of your mind, in my mind, all the time, that voice tends to be running constantly. It tends to be self-obsessed, as in it doesn't idly consider the problems of other people. It tends to bring up its own problems, as in we tend to think about our own problems, ruminating on what we got to do or what we should have done or what we might do tomorrow. And when we're in a seated meditation, we basically set a goal for ourselves. My goal, sitting here, is to focus on my breath. That's the only thing I want to do. So, why can't I do that? Why is it so difficult to accomplish this goal that I've set out for myself? When I said I wanted to sit here and meditate, I said I just want to sit here. It's a really clear goal to me. It's something that I really want to do. I have an honest intention to sit here and just focus on the breath, or focus on my belly, or focus on a vision, maybe an image, or focus on a candle. Anything that's one point is a perfect object for meditation. Focusing on the sounds that come in. I've set out this clear goal. I want to narrow my focus to one single thing. So why can't I? This is where we're starting to identify that split in our mind, how we are not as in control as we think we are. And the real trick is that we tend to feel like the conscious part of me and the part of me that keeps running incessantly, we tend to think that those are the same part of us. But is it? Now, ultimately, yes, it kind of is. It's all happening in my brain, right? So it's all part of this one brain, so how is it not part of me? Well, that feeling of I am doesn't have to be completely identified with that running narrative, that running voice nonstop in the mind, right? So when we sit down and have the express interest of focusing our attention on a single point of focus, such as our breath, then we can notice how there are competing influences going on in our mind at any given time, because something's interrupting me, something's distracting me from doing what I've set out to do. And so this is what it's meant by self-discipline or self-control. There's the part of me who could have the forward thought saying, hey, it's going to be really helpful for me to be able to concentrate with greater depth and more profound concentration. This is going to be a positive thing for me, and I'd like to develop this skill. And there's a part of me that seems expressly opposed to the development of this skill. In fact, we've been spending most of our lives conditioning that part of our brain that just runs, that part of us that gets bored so easily. Eckhart Tolle has a great line in his Power of Now that he talks about when you start to become aware in a meditative sense, then you're never waiting anymore. Because any opportunity where you're somewhere and someone else is going to arrive but they haven't arrived yet, maybe they're 5-10 minutes late, well, this is a perfect opportunity to just sort of come back to the present. Oh wow, what a gift, I have an extra 5 minutes to bring my attention to the present. I have nothing else to do, so I might as well enjoy this scenery around me, wherever it is. I might just, even if it's a dirty city, doesn't matter. If it's a beautiful mountain or if it's a ugly, problematic place, either way, I'm just going to bring my attention to the different things that are here in the present, right? And so when the person comes to you and says then, oh, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, Eckhart Tolle recommends you say, no, that's all right, I wasn't waiting. I was just standing here, enjoying myself. Now it sounds almost like a joke. It sounds almost like a joke. Like if I said that to a lot of my friends, like, oh yeah, I wasn't waiting. I was just standing here enjoying myself. You know, they'd probably think I'm being sarcastic as a rude like, yo man, yeah, of course I wasn't waiting for you. But no, we're talking about actually just enjoying the moment, enjoying the time while you have a moment to be mindful and bring your awareness back to the present moment. So from here, we can kind of talk about, we've talked about the ego, this voice that kind of runs in our head constantly, self-discipline or self-control, which is kind of the part of us that knows, that is aware, that can plan, exerting some sort of influence and prolonged influence, conditioning that part of ourself that just runs incessantly, sort of conditioning that part of our minds to calm down a little bit so that we can enjoy ourselves more frequently, because that voice is the source that causes us to be just upset at the situation, irritated, bored. It's that part of us that's really getting upset, right? So our self-control, self-discipline is us conditioning that part of our mind to calm down. And this is sort of the benefit of seated meditation, where we sit down and we practice and we just notice how often the mind comes in to distract us, right? So that's all up to basically the 6th branch of yoga, whereas the 7th branch of yoga is quite a bit deeper than that, because here we're talking about losing the difference between subject and object, as in we merge completely with the object. So if I'm looking at a candle, the point is that there's not necessarily a perceiver looking at the candle, but the perception of the candle is all that is. So my sense of self that I am looking at a candle sort of dissolves, because all that is the perception of the candle. No, I am just observing the thing that's in front of us. I know that sounds a little bit abstract, and especially for people who have not, for those of us who have not necessarily been in practicing meditation for that long. But this is something that we can sort of work towards. And there's a really nice metaphor in the yogic, I'm not sure if this comes from yoga or Buddhism, but there's a nice metaphor that I think it's yoga that describes the 6th, 7th, and 8th limbs of yoga. And that is we can think of our mind like a pond, right? And every time we think of a thought, it's like throwing a rock into that pond. All right, so we might throw little rocks in the pond and it might not ripple too much. But most of us, because that voice is just going nonstop, we're throwing handfuls of rocks in and big old boulders in there all day long. I mean, we're never even stopping. Some of us can't even sleep because we want to throw these rocks in all the time. So this pond is just turbulent, just totally turbulent. So in the sixth limb, it's kind of like, instead of throwing handfuls of rocks in and big boulders, it's more like throwing just one small pebble in. Just breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Counting the breath. Reducing all the clutter of the mind to one stream of thoughts instead of 10 simultaneously, right? So obviously the water is going to calm down, but it's never going to get perfectly calm because we're still throwing one rock, right? We're still focusing on that single one pointed thing. The seventh limb is more about stopping the throwing of the rock. So now there's even no more rock to throw. All there is the perception. So all there is the lake, is the pond. But if we've been throwing rocks in the pond for quite some time, it's not going to just immediately be crystal flat, mirror glass-like pond. It's still going to be pretty turbulent. So it's going to take a while to be in that state of not throwing rocks in that seventh limb before the pond actually settles completely down. Now, we might say that when the water is turbulent, we can't really see into it. It's not clear. It's cloudy. It's moving. It's veiled. It's clouded. Not clear. Not pristine water. Once the water settles, though, we might say that there are no longer any obstructions between the water. You can look straight into the water. You have clear sight to what's going through. Now, whatever's on the bottom has a clear chance to sort of be seen from outside. That's described as essentially the eighth stage, whereas if our thoughts are sort of the murkiness over our consciousness, it causes so the consciousness can't really shine through. So once our consciousness sort of emerges with that item and we become really focused, really calm of mind, and actually sort of still the mind over a prolonged time, then the water has a chance to smooth out and the pure consciousness sort of shines through. And it's argued that, I can't confirm or deny this, but it's argued that this state of pure consciousness, that the experience of consciousness in itself is blissful. That if you sort of take away all the distractions, all the baggage from yesterday, and all the future worries, that when consciousness shines through on its own, when you just identify with consciousness, that it's a blissful experience, that it's a positive experience. And so that's where we get this sort of self-realization, where we get to see through the water. It's no longer clouded or distorted by the waves. It's just a pristine, clear look at what is. And so maybe most of us will never get to this point, or maybe we will. It depends on how much we practice. And so that's why it's important to know what ego, mindfulness, and meditation are. Ego is kind of that voice that's sort of constantly running in the background. Mindfulness is the ability to become aware in the present moment and be aware in particular of how that voice is sort of distracting us from time to time, or most of the time in most of our cases. And then a formal meditation practice is an opportunity for us to kind of go one-on-one with that ego, to like sort of sit down and say, yeah, I have a goal and I'm just going to try to focus on my breath for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, up to you. And noticing how that ego sort of just pops in all the time. If we get really into our meditation practice and become essentially highly skilled meditators, we might say, then we might notice these experiences where we sort of merge with the thing that we're focusing on. It might be our breath, it might be a candle, it might be a mandala, it might be whatever it is, an image in our mind. And so we actually start to lose the observer, we start to only see the observed image. And if we get in that state for a prolonged time, then maybe eventually one day we can sort of reach this state of samadhi, this enlightened state. But that is not necessarily the point, though. The point is just to become more aware. It doesn't matter. It's not about the end game. It's about enjoying the process while the process is continuing. And that is basically what yoga and life is all about. It's just about enjoying the process, because You know, that we all have destinations, we have goals that we want, and it's good to be goal-oriented, but the point of the goal is that it's just the reason for taking the journey, right? It's not the enjoyment of the journey itself, right? The real thing that's going on, even though the goal sort of orients what we do on a day-to-day basis, the real experience of life, which is the thing that we're not really going for the goal, we're just going for the experience of living, is what Joseph Campbell has argued. So it's that process of it's the journey, not the destination. But the destination gives the journey a direction, and that can increase our well-being in life in a number of ways. So whether our goal is enlightenment, or it's just greater peace of mind, or it's just greater focus so I can get into my basketball game a little bit more completely, or be a better golfer, or be a better musician, or be a better lover, be a better family, better father, a better brother, sister, whatever our relationship is to the people around us. This sort of practice, mindfulness practice, meditation, formal meditation, all of these can help lead us to, they're good goals that we can go there on the way, but we can't forget to enjoy the process while we're doing it. So that is all for today, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining me. If you've made it this far, go ahead and click subscribe down below. I don't know what you're waiting for. You know you like these videos because you made it this far, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So you might as well click subscribe, that way you won't miss the next one. And in the meantime, keep learning, keep growing, and have a great day.